"Talk to me again and you're fired," the Count yelled at the new maid. But what she did next shocked him. "Before we begin this beautiful period romance story, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you're joining me from." Eliza Turner arrived at Ravenshire Castle before the sun had fully risen, clutching the strap of her small linen bag as if it were the last anchor in a world she still did not trust. The carriage that had brought her from the village rattled away down the gravel drive, leaving her standing before the great doors with a breath caught somewhere between fear and resolve. She had imagined this moment many times, but imagining it had never included the tremor in her hands or the weight pressing against her ribs. Mrs. Pembroke, the housekeeper, welcomed her with brisk efficiency. "You're the new maid, then? Eliza Turner, is it? Come along. The staff is already assembled." Her voice held neither warmth nor cruelty. It was a practiced neutrality that came from years of managing too many tasks and too many secrets. Eliza followed her through the long servants' corridor. The walls murmured with early morning footsteps, the clatter of pots and the quiet gossip of a household that never truly slept. But as Eliza entered the servants' hall, the chatter dimmed. Eyes turned toward her, curious, assessing, whispering. "She's young," someone muttered. "And thin as a reed," another replied. Eliza lowered her gaze, grateful for the protection of her bonnet, but even with her head bowed, she could feel the weight of their attention. She had hoped to pass unnoticed, at least for a little while. She had hoped for a quiet beginning, but quiet would not exist for her in this place, not today. Mrs. Pembroke raised her voice. "Listen now. Lord Blackwell will be joining us shortly. Remember your order and keep still." A ripple of tension went through the room. Eliza had heard murmurs about the Count while travelling. Strict, disciplined, icy in manner and expectation. Some called him admirable. Others avoided speaking of him at all. Every servant she had met so far spoke his name with the same careful tone one used for storms. The door at the far end of the hall opened, and silence fell like a held breath. Count Henry Blackwell entered with measured steps, tall and sharply composed. His coat was immaculate, his cravat tied with mathematical precision, his posture unbending. He scanned the line of servants with a single sweeping glance. No expression softened his features, no warmth passed through the room. He stopped before them and spoke with a voice that carried the authority of a man accustomed to instant obedience. "Good morning. I expect a steady hand from each of you today. The estate requires order, discipline, and silence when appropriate." His gaze moved from one face to another, then caught on Eliza. For a fraction of a second, something in his eyes faltered. Confusion? Recognition? Annoyance? She could not tell. He stepped closer, studying her with an intensity that made her spine taut. "You are the new maid," he said. Eliza swallowed. "Yes, my lord." "You will address me as my lord only when necessary," he stated, his tone sharpening. "Otherwise, you will remain silent in my presence unless spoken to directly." She bowed her head. "Of course, my lord." He seemed to hear something in her tone he did not like. His jaw tightened. "What is your name?" "Eliza Turner, my lord." "And your references?" Mrs. Pembroke stepped forward. "All verified, sir. I have taken the liberty of reviewing her paperwork thoroughly." Henry's gaze didn't move from Eliza. "Did you work in a large household before this?" "A smaller one, my lord," she said, feeling her voice waver. "And what were your duties there?" She opened her mouth to answer, but her timing overlapped his next question by a breath. Her voice brushed against his. The servants stiffened. Henry's eyes narrowed, the temperature of the hall seeming to drop an instant. "Do you make a habit of interrupting your employer?" Eliza froze. "No, my lord, I—" "Enough," he cuttingly replied. "I will not tolerate insolence on your first day." "I meant no disrespect." "Silence." He said the word like a blade, sharp and clean. A faint flush rose on Eliza's cheeks as she dropped her gaze. Heat pricked the back of her eyes, but she held firm. Henry stepped even closer, lowering his voice though the entire hall could hear him. "You will not speak to me again unless I ask you a direct question. Do you understand?" Eliza nodded. "Say it," he commanded. "I understand, my lord. If you break this rule, you will be dismissed immediately." Whispers fluttered around the room like startled birds. Eliza held perfectly still, wishing the floorboards would open and swallow her. Her humiliation hung in the air, raw and heavy. Henry turned from her without another glance. "Dismissed," he said to the servants. The room emptied quickly. Eliza stayed until only Mrs. Pembroke remained. The housekeeper exhaled slowly. "Child, you've had a rough beginning," she murmured. "The master is particular. He values precision." Eliza nodded, though her throat felt tight. "I didn't mean—" "I know." Mrs. Pembroke softened just slightly. "But do be cautious. His temper is rarely loud, but it is exact. He expects absolute obedience. Keep your head down, work hard, speak little, and all will settle soon enough." Eliza forced a small smile. "Yes, ma'am." Yet inside her, something else stirred. Not anger, but an old familiar ache she had hoped to leave behind. She had come to Ravenshire to rebuild, to disappear into routine, to be useful without notice. She had not expected to draw the scorn of the one man who ruled the estate with an iron stillness. Throughout the morning, she scrubbed floors and polished fixtures with focused determination. She avoided conversation and kept her steps soft. Servants passed by with glances that held sympathy, but also caution. No one wanted to be associated with the girl who had already drawn the Count's ire. By midday, Eliza found herself assigned to the west corridor, a long, quiet passage lined with portraits and narrow windows. Mrs. Pembroke had warned her that the corridor was rarely used and often avoided. Eliza asked no questions. She preferred the silence. The air there felt different, older, as if carrying echoes from years long gone. The portraits watched her with stern eyes as she dusted, swept, and wiped each frame with care. She whispered small apologies whenever her cloth touched a surface too abruptly, an old habit she had learned from a mentor who valued gentleness with objects. She was bent over a table, polishing a metal candlestick, when she heard footsteps approaching, firm, measured footsteps, the kind she already recognized. Henry Blackwell appeared at the far end of the corridor. Eliza straightened, heart quickening. She bowed her head, stepping aside with silent grace. She did not speak. She did not dare. Henry walked past her without a word, yet as he passed she felt the faint shift of air, a reminder of how near he was, how present. She kept her eyes lowered until he turned a corner and disappeared into a room with a heavy oak door. Moments later, faint sounds drifted through the wood. At first she thought he was speaking to another person, but there were no footsteps, no replies. The cadence of his voice rose and fell, tense, sorrowful, questioning. Eliza's stomach tightened. She had heard voices like that before, conversations spoken to absent figures, memories held too close, regrets carried too long. It stirred something deep inside her, something painful and strangely familiar. She moved closer, careful not to make a sound. She did not intend to listen, yet the quiet corridor carried the Count's murmur clearly. "I tried," he whispered. "Heaven knows I tried. What more do you want of me? What more can I give? Tell me something." His voice cracked, a fracture quickly sealed by a breath of harsh restraint. Eliza's eyes softened. Whatever this powerful man faced alone behind that door, it wasn't arrogance or pride. It was grief. A floorboard betrayed her. The faint creak snapped Henry's voice silent. The door flew open. Henry stood framed in the doorway, eyes sharp, expression carved in tension. He looked almost startled to see her, startled and defensive. Eliza froze mid-step. His gaze swept from her face to the corridor, then back to her. "What?" he said slowly. "Exactly are you doing here?" She opened her mouth, then remembered his rule. She closed it again. He stepped toward her, towering yet controlled. "Do you intend to disobey me?" Her pulse thudded. She shook her head. "Then answer me." Her hands trembled at her sides, but no sound left her lips. Henry's jaw tightened with frustration. "I ordered you to remain silent unless spoken to. Now I'm speaking to you and you refuse to reply. Is that defiance?" She shook her head again. "Then what is it?" His tone dropped, almost softer. "Fear." She did not know how to answer without breaking his own command. He seemed to realize the absurdity only after the moment stretched too long. He closed his eyes once, as if gathering control, then opened them with renewed authority. "Come with me." Eliza blinked. "My lord, do not speak, follow." The command rang with finality. Eliza stepped after him, confusion curling through her chest. She wondered whether he meant to dismiss her already. She wondered if this place would reject her as every other had. Henry walked ahead with long strides, not looking back to check if she followed. She kept her pace steady, though dread coiled inside her. He led her away from the west corridor, down a narrow staircase, then through a short hall lit by a single lamp. Each step echoed with tension. Eliza's breath shortened. Henry said nothing, but something in his shoulders hinted at urgency. He stopped before a small door and pushed it open. "Inside," he said. She stepped in cautiously. Henry followed, closing the door behind them with a quiet thud. He turned toward her with unreadable eyes, the tension in the room tightening between them like a drawn string. "Eliza Turner," he said, voice low and steady. "There is something you need to explain." A chill passed down her spine. Henry stepped closer, his gaze fixed on hers. "Tell me," he said, "why were you standing outside that door?" Before she could even think of an answer that would not break his rule, a new sound drifted through the corridor outside. A slow, unmistakable footstep, stopping directly in front of the closed door. A faint shadow passed under the door, the kind that could not be mistaken for drifting light. Someone stood just outside, listening. Henry's eyes flickered toward the door for the briefest moment, then returned to Eliza. His voice dropped to a whisper that still carried the weight of command. "Do not move." She froze. Henry stepped toward the door with silent precision, opened it a few inches, and found Mrs. Pembroke standing there, her hands folded neatly, her expression a mixture of apology and concern. "My lord," she said, inclining her head, "I was told you required the household inventory for the week. I did not mean to intrude." Henry's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. "The inventory can wait." Mrs. Pembroke nodded, but her eyes drifted past him toward Eliza. The glance held a question the housekeeper did not voice. She gave a quiet bow and walked away with steady steps. Henry closed the door, exhaling slowly. He turned back toward Eliza, who had remained exactly where he'd placed her. "You attract attention without uttering a word," he murmured. Eliza kept her gaze lowered. Her heart thudded so loudly she feared he might hear it. He crossed his arms. "Now, why were you at that door?" She opened her mouth to reply, then stopped herself again. His own rule trapped her. She could not explain without disobeying him. Henry seemed to realize this only after a long, taut silence. He pressed his palm briefly to his forehead, as though frustrated by his own contradiction. "Very well," he said. "Follow me." He led her out of the small room and into the narrow servants' passage. They walked in silence, Henry's steps sharp, with barely restrained agitation. Eliza kept her hands clasped in front of her, careful to match his pace without drawing attention. At the top of the stairs, he spoke again. "I assigned you to the west corridor because it is quiet, not because I expected you to wander near rooms you were not instructed to clean." She dipped her head, acknowledging the reprimand. "I cannot have servants listening at doors," he continued, "especially that one." Something in his voice softened, but only for an instant. Eliza sensed the shift. The room he had entered earlier carried more weight than he wished to admit. He stopped before the servants' quarters and turned to face her fully. "Did you hear anything?" Her breath caught. She shook her head. Henry studied her closely. Too closely. "Your silence is convenient, Miss Turner." Almost suspiciously so. Eliza steadied her breathing. She did not wish to seem evasive, yet she could not violate the restriction he had placed upon her. Henry gestured toward the narrow hallway. "Return to your duties. I expect no further incidents." She curtsied and turned to leave, but he called her back. "One more thing." She faced him again, his gaze hardened. "I do not tolerate curiosity. Let this be your final warning." Eliza nodded and slipped away. For the remainder of the afternoon, she kept her head down. She scrubbed the scullery floor, polished brass knobs, dusted bookshelves, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind calm. Yet her thoughts drifted again and again to the west corridor, to the tone of Henry's voice behind that door, to the silence that followed her accidental creak of the floorboard, and to the unmistakable grief in his whisper. By evening, most of the household retreated to their quarters. Eliza remained in the corridor with the portraits, wiping the last traces of dust from the frames. The candle she carried cast a warm halo around her, softening the faces of the long-deceased Blackwells staring down with somber pride. As she stepped back to inspect her work, a young footman hurried toward her. "Eliza," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder. "Mrs. Pembroke wants you in the kitchen." Eliza nodded and followed him. The boy looked barely 16, with freckles across his nose and a nervous way of running his hands through his hair. "Is something wrong?" he asked softly as they walked. "They say the master is upset more than usual." Eliza's pulse quickened, but she said nothing. The boy noticed. "You really don't talk much, do you?" he said with a faint smile. "That's all right. Silence is safer in this house anyway." He opened the kitchen door for her. Inside, Mrs. Pembroke stood with her back to the hearth, arms folded. Several servants lingered nearby, pretending to work while clearly listening. "Eliza," the housekeeper began, "I've received word from his lordship that you were seen in the west corridor longer than expected." Eliza lowered her gaze. Mrs. Pembroke sighed. "Child, that corridor unsettles people. You're new, so I took it upon myself to explain what others will not." The servants nearby froze, clearly eager to hear this. Mrs. Pembroke continued. "The west corridor is seldom used for a reason. It was once the private quarter of the late Earl and his governess, and since their passing, the master prefers it left quiet. Too many memories linger in places like that." Eliza felt her breath tighten. The housekeeper's voice softened. "Do not stray there unless instructed. The master carries more burdens than he shows. A careless step near old ghosts can stir trouble." Eliza nodded, her hands tightening around her apron. She wished she could ask more, not out of disobedience, but out of genuine concern. Yet her tongue remained bound by the Count's decree. Mrs. Pembroke gestured for her to return to her tasks. "Off you go, and Eliza, tread lightly." Eliza left the kitchen with more questions than answers. That night, as the castle settled into a hush broken only by distant footsteps, Eliza carried her candle toward the servant staircase. The air grew cooler as she ascended. Shadows stretched long against the walls. Halfway up, she heard something unexpected. A faint rustle. A soft exhale. Henry. He stood at the landing above, leaning one hand against the railing. His shoulders rose and fell with slow breaths, as though he'd been walking the halls for some time. When he noticed Eliza, he straightened quickly, the mask returning to his features. "Miss Turner," he said, "you are out late." She curtsied. "I do not recall assigning you evening duties." She shook her head gently, then pointed toward the servants' quarters, hoping he understood she was headed there. Henry nodded, though his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. "Very well." He stepped aside to allow her to pass, but something compelled her to pause. She sensed the storm beneath his calm, the same turmoil she had glimpsed behind the oak door. Henry noticed her hesitation. "What is it?" he asked, softer now. Eliza swallowed. She could not speak to him. She wanted to offer comfort, but she was trapped in silence. He seemed to read her struggle. His voice dropped. "You may speak. For this moment only." Her breath caught, but fear, habit, and humility tangled inside her, holding her voice captive. She opened her mouth, unable to form even a single word. Henry exhaled quietly. "Never mind." "Go on, then." Eliza lowered her eyes and ascended the remaining stairs. She expected him to walk away. He did not. He followed her. At a distance, but he followed. When she reached the corridor leading to the servants' rooms, she paused again, unsure whether to curtsy or simply turn away. Before she could decide, Henry spoke without meeting her gaze. "I did not intend to humiliate you this morning." Eliza's heart stirred. He continued, "I spoke sharply because discipline is required to maintain order here, but I recognize now that I may have been excessive." She looked up. Henry caught her eyes, then quickly looked away. "It will not happen again." She finally managed a small nod. It was all she could offer. Henry inclined his head once in return. "Good night, Miss Turner." But as he turned to leave, the door at the end of the corridor creaked open slightly. A door no servant used at this hour. A door leading back toward the west wing. Henry stiffened, and Eliza felt the cold ripple of recognition. The west corridor was calling again. Before either of them could speak or move, a long shadow drifted across the floorboards toward them. The shadow stretched along the floor with slow, deliberate movement, as if someone stood just around the corner, and had taken one quiet step too many. Henry's posture tensed at once. Eliza felt her candle flicker in her trembling hand. "Stay here," Henry murmured. She obeyed instantly. He stepped toward the half-open door at the end of the corridor, each footfall steady, controlled, and quiet. Though he tried to hide it, Eliza saw the faint stiffness in his shoulders, not fear exactly, but something close to dread. As he reached the door, he pushed it open with a swift motion. The corridor beyond was empty. Not a trace of movement, no sound, only the faint rustle of distant drafts. Henry scanned the shadows with narrowed eyes. "Who was here?" he demanded softly, though no one could have answered. Eliza approached carefully, her candle casting a faint glow across the carved paneling. Henry glanced back at her, his expression tightening. "You should not be in this wing at night," he said. She dipped her head, acknowledging the warning. "This part of the house is not for servants to wander," he continued, voice low. "There are matters here that do not concern the staff." Eliza wished she could tell him she was not wandering, nor prying, nor seeking anything that would threaten him. But she could not speak. Not after the rule he had pronounced so sharply, so publicly. Henry seemed to recall that rule himself. His jaw tightened. He exhaled slowly, as if fighting a frustration directed as much at himself as at her. "Go," he said at last. "Rest. The day has been too long for both of us." Eliza nodded and retreated toward her small room. She felt Henry's eyes on her until she turned the corner, candlelight trembling across the walls. But even after she closed her door, she could not sleep. The strange footsteps, the shifting shadows, the grief beneath Henry's voice, and the hidden room where he spoke to no one. Her mind circled these questions until exhaustion finally pulled her into a restless slumber. The next morning came with the clang of the kitchen bell and the rush of routine. Eliza joined the servants in the hall, feeling the weight of several curious glances. The events of the previous day, her humiliation, had not been forgotten. As she arranged linens on a table, two maids whispered nearby. "I heard he nearly dismissed her already," one said. "And on her first day," the other added. "Imagine, she'll not last the week." Eliza lowered her eyes and continued folding. She knew they did not mean cruelty. Gossip was a form of survival in large houses, but the words settled heavily in her chest. Mrs. Pembroke entered, clapping her hands. "Enough chatter. Work is waiting. Eliza with me." Eliza followed her through the corridor toward the library. The housekeeper gave her a quick sideways glance. "The master has assigned you tasks here today. Bookshelves, brass, the mantel. Keep your hands busy and your ears closed." Eliza nodded. "And whatever happens," Mrs. Pembroke added in a quieter tone, "keep your distance from the west corridor. The master is not himself when it comes to that wing." She left Eliza with her dusting cloth and an armful of books to organize. The library felt heavy with quiet history, not oppressive but full of watchful stillness. Eliza worked steadily, grateful for the distraction. It was while adjusting a row of thick volumes that she accidentally nudged a book off the shelf. It fell to the floor with a soft thud, its spine cracking open. A folded paper slipped out from within its pages. Eliza froze. The paper looked old but well kept, the delicate script unmistakably feminine and familiar in a way that made her heart leap. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it. "My dear Henry," it began, "if this reaches you, it means I have gone where neither of us wished." The handwriting was unmistakable, elegant loops, soft strokes. Amelia Harrow. Eliza's breath caught, the mentor who had once sheltered her. The woman who vanished without a trace. The very name the housekeeper had spoken with such careful respect. Eliza read further, her heart tightening with every line. "You must not blame yourself. You must not carry what is not yours. If ever a girl with eyes that see too closely comes to Ravenshire, trust her. She knows things you cannot yet bear to speak. She can help you." Eliza's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the letter. Help him. But how could Amelia have known she would ever come here? Had Amelia sent her? No. Eliza had come on her own, guided only by the faint hope of finding answers, and yet the letter spoke as if it were meant for her. A soft sound behind her made her snap upright. Henry stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His gaze flicked from her to the letter in her hand, and something darkened in his eyes. Not anger, but a kind of raw, startled vulnerability. "Put that down," he said quietly. Eliza swallowed, her pulse racing. She placed the letter slowly on the table between them, careful not to tear it. Henry stepped closer. "How much did you read?" She clasped her hands, unable to answer. She could not speak. Not to him, not after his command. He noticed the paralysis in her posture. His voice hardened. "I asked you a question." Eliza looked at the letter, then at him, then back down again. Her silence stretched thin between them. Henry exhaled sharply. "You are bound by the rule I gave you." His voice sounded as though he regretted saying it aloud. She nodded. "And now that rule keeps you from explaining yourself." She nodded again. The tension in the room thickened, pressing against the air. Henry's fingers curled at his sides. "I should not have made that rule," he said quietly. Her eyes rose in surprise. He did not expand. Instead, he lifted the letter with careful hands, folding it slowly as if it were fragile. His expression softened into something pained. "This belonged to Amelia," he murmured. "She left without a word, without a reason, and now you find this among my books." Eliza bowed her head, waiting for instruction or reprimand, but Henry only stood there, wrestling with something unspoken. At last he said, "Why did you pick up that book? Why this shelf this morning?" She hesitated, then pointed to the line of volumes she had been dusting, indicating that the book had simply fallen. Henry considered this, though his eyes held doubt. He stepped toward her. "Miss Turner, you must understand something. Amelia meant much to me. She was more than a governess. She was the only person who ever challenged me to be better than I was." Eliza listened, heart aching at the emotion hidden beneath his calm voice. "When she disappeared, the house changed," he went on. "I changed. And now you appear, reading letters meant for me alone. Why you? Why now?" Eliza could not answer, even if she had the words. Henry lifted his gaze to hers. His voice lowered. "Do you know Amelia?" She flinched at the question. Her eyes fell to the floor. Henry's expression sharpened. "You do." He stepped back, shock breaking across his face in a brief, raw flash. He ran a hand through his hair, something she had never seen him do. "This complicates everything," he whispered. Eliza's pulse thundered in her ears. He took a breath, then said, "We will speak of this again, when I am prepared." He tucked the letter into his coat, the motion slow and thoughtful. He turned to leave the library, but paused in the doorway without facing her. "You may finish here," he said, "but do not mention what you found." He walked out before she could nod. The rest of the day moved in a blur. Servants passed her. Duties shifted. Chores filled the hours. Yet Eliza's thoughts stayed fixed on Amelia's words, Henry's expression, and the feeling that something long buried had begun to surface. That evening, as she polished a brass candlestick in the quiet of the corridor, she sensed movement behind her. She turned. Henry stood there watching her, with a look that held more questions than answers. Before he could speak, before she could lower her gaze, the floorboard behind him creaked. Henry spun around. Someone else stood at the far end of the corridor, half hidden in shadow. Henry's breath caught at the sight of the figure at the far end of the corridor, standing so still that for a moment Eliza wondered if she was imagining the shape entirely. But then the shadow shifted, stepped back and vanished around the corner with a soft whisper of fabric. Henry strode forward at once. "Who is there?" His voice was sharp, commanded obedience, demanded truth. Silence answered him. He took several quick steps, but whoever had been there was long gone. He turned back toward Eliza, frustration tightening his features. "This house listens," he muttered, "and it whispers more than I care to hear." Eliza's fingers tightened around the candlestick she had been polishing. He approached her again, gaze fixed on her with the weight of a question he had waited years to ask. "Miss Turner," he began, "we must speak plainly. About Amelia. About what you know. About why you're here." Her pulse raced. She wished desperately she could speak. She wished she could break the rule he himself had laid upon her. But she could not break his command, not after the humiliation he had inflicted upon her that first morning. She lowered her head. Henry exhaled sharply. "This silence is impossible." He paced once, then stopped in front of her again. "Very well. If you cannot speak, then listen." His tone softened, though the intensity in him remained. "You found Amelia's letter. That was not chance, though I don't yet understand the reason. But I do know this. She trusted you enough to reveal yourself. Eliza's heart ached. She tried to tell him, with a humble look, with the tremor in her breath, that she had not meant to intrude, but her voice remained trapped by his earlier decree. Henry noticed the struggle. "I have made a mistake," he murmured. "A grave one." He turned his head slightly, listening to the corridor around them, as though expecting another unseen guest to return. "No more secrets," he said at last. "Not from you." He gestured for her to follow him. Eliza hesitated. The last time he had told her to follow, it had resulted in reprimand and suspicion, but something in his voice was different now, not commanding but searching. She followed. Henry led her down a short flight of stairs and into a narrow room lit only by a single wall lamp. It was a place of order, with shelves of ledgers and drawers filled with correspondence, sealed by wax. His study, though not one meant for guests. He closed the door behind them. "Eliza," he said, dropping the formality for once, "tell me how you knew Amelia." Her lips parted, instinct urging her to obey, to speak the truth long buried. But the memory of his earlier words, "Speak to me again and you're fired," pressed upon her like iron. Her silence stretched into the space between them. Henry's shoulders sagged. "You will not speak to me, even now." She shook her head slowly, not in refusal, but in explanation. "You cannot," he whispered. She nodded. Understanding broke across his face, like the slow dawning of something he had long resisted. "You are bound by my own cruelty." She did not answer, because she could not. Henry turned away from her briefly, as if steadying himself. When he faced her again, his voice was low, controlled, and unbearably gentle. "You have my permission to speak. From this moment, I lift the rule." Relief washed over her so suddenly she had to grip the edge of a small table to remain upright. The breath she released trembled like a bird freed from a cage, but she still did not speak. Henry frowned. "You are free to answer." Her voice barely emerged, soft and cautious. "I fear that if I speak now, my lord, I will say more than you wish to hear." He blinked, stunned. He had expected a timid reply. He had not expected courage. "I want the truth," he said firmly. Eliza steadied herself, gathering breath. Her voice remained quiet, yet clear. "I knew Amelia, my lord. She stayed with my family for a few months before she disappeared for good." Henry's posture stiffened, as though the ground beneath him shifted. "She taught me many things," Eliza continued. "How to read a room, how to listen to what others overlook, how to notice the smallest detail in silence." Henry moved closer, unable to hide the urgency in his tone. "And why did she go to your family?" Eliza lowered her gaze. "Because she said someone at Ravenshire had accused her of wrongdoing. She refused to tell us who. She said leaving was necessary to protect a boy she loved like her own." Henry closed his eyes as though struck. "She meant you," Eliza whispered. His breath shuddered. "I feared that." He walked to the window, gripping the sill with white-knuckled hands. The soft evening light touched the edges of his face, revealing not anger, but pain. "Eliza," he said softly, "did she ever tell you why she truly left, the real reason?" Eliza hesitated. "Only that she carried a secret, one that could hurt the wrong person if revealed." Henry's voice dropped. "And did she tell you who that person was?" Eliza took a steadying breath. "No, my lord, but I think she wished me to find out." He turned sharply toward her. "How?" "The letter," she said. "Her words were not only for you. She meant them for the person who would see what others missed." Henry studied her with an expression she could not read, something between awe and disbelief. "Tell me," he whispered. "Why did she trust you?" Eliza's voice softened. "Because she knew I had reasons of my own to understand silence and fear and secrets hidden in plain sight." Henry took a step closer. "What reasons?" She hesitated. The room seemed to shrink around them. "My father," she said quietly. "He suffered from episodes. He heard things, saw things. People accused him of madness. But Amelia said it was grief, old wounds. She taught us both how to manage it, how to see the difference between memory and reality." Henry's eyes widened, the truth breaking over him with startling clarity. "So when you heard me speaking in that room," he said slowly, "you recognized it?" Eliza nodded. "Yes, my lord." He lowered himself into a chair as though the weight of the revelation pressed upon him. For the first time, he looked not like the unshakable Count of Ravenshire, but like a man who had spent too many years wrestling ghosts. "I was speaking to her," he whispered. "To Amelia, or to the memory of her. I go to that room when I cannot stop the past from following me." Eliza searched his face, expecting shame or denial. Instead, she found quiet honesty. Henry continued, "The rumors after she left blamed me. They said she fled because of scandal, but I knew it was because of a secret she refused to share. A secret tied to this house." Eliza felt a cold ripple along her spine. "Do you know what it was?" He shook his head. "Only that it still follows me." Eliza stepped forward gently. "Perhaps the letter holds the key." Henry looked down at his coat where the letter was hidden. "Perhaps, but not alone." He lifted his gaze to her, and for the first time the distance between master and servant seemed to fade. "Eliza Turner," he said softly, "you are involved now. Not by my choosing, but by Amelia's, and I cannot ignore that." She bowed her head, unsure how to respond. Henry rose from his chair, standing close enough that she felt the intensity of his presence without a single touch between them. "What else did Amelia tell you?" he asked. Eliza took a slow breath. "She said that Ravenshire held truths carved into its walls, and that if I ever heard whispers where there should be none, it meant the past was stirring." Henry's pulse visibly quickened. "And you believe this?" She met his gaze. "I know it." The air in the room tingled with the weight of unspoken possibilities: fear, memory, connection. Henry stepped even closer. "Then help me understand it, Eliza. Help me understand what Amelia tried to protect." Before she could answer, the handle of the study door rattled. Henry stiffened. Eliza turned, and the door began to open. The study door swung inward, and Henry stepped instinctively in front of Eliza, his composure restored in an instant, his voice steady. "Who is it?" "Mrs." Pembroke entered with an apologetic bow. "My lord, forgive the intrusion. The evening letters have arrived. I was told you wished to be informed at once." Henry's posture eased only slightly. "Very well. Leave them on the desk." She placed a small stack of envelopes neatly beside the inkwell. Her eyes drifted briefly toward Eliza, then to the faint tension in Henry's stance. She said nothing, but her silence held concern. Henry dismissed her with a nod, and Mrs. Pembroke withdrew, closing the door quietly behind her. The room settled into an uneasy hush. Henry exhaled slowly. The household grows too curious. Eliza clasped her hands. "Forgive me, my lord. I never meant to cause distraction." "You did not," he answered. "My own actions invited it." He moved to the desk, opening envelopes with mechanical precision. Yet his gaze flicked up every so often, returning to Eliza as though drawn by something he did not fully understand. The candlelight softened the edges of the room, making the shadows gentler, the books less imposing. But the tension remained. After a few moments, Henry placed the letters aside. "The servants think I favor you," he said. Eliza's heart tightened. "I do not wish them to." "Nor do I," he replied honestly. "It complicates everything." She nodded, though her gaze dropped. He walked around the desk and stood before her. "These rumors must end. You've done nothing to deserve them." She spoke quietly, careful not to let her voice break. "People will talk no matter what I do." "Then they should talk of me," Henry said. "Not you." Eliza lifted her eyes. "My lord," but his expression changed, becoming thoughtful, almost troubled. "Eliza, what happened yesterday should not define your place here. I gave an order I now regret." Shock touched her face. She had not expected an apology. Not from him. Not after the way he'd humiliated her in front of the entire staff. "My lord, He raised a hand lightly, not to silence her, but as if he didn't trust his own reaction to hearing her speak of that moment. "I saw fear in your eyes, and I mistook it for disobedience. That is my failure, not yours." Her breath trembled. "You weren't wrong to demand discipline. I interrupted you." "You answered a question," he replied, "and I punished you for it." He looked away, jaw tightening with unspoken regret. "I cannot allow myself to be unjust," he murmured. "Not again." Eliza hesitated. "You are not unjust, my lord, only careful. He met her eyes then, and something raw flickered in his gaze. Careful is not always kind. A brief silence settled between them, not cold, but fragile, as though the truth had finally been allowed to breathe. Then Henry straightened, regaining his calm. "Come, I must show you something." She followed him out of the study, down the corridor, and into the grand hall. The staff was busy preparing for the newly announced dinner, hurrying with silver trays and linens. The air buzzed with urgency. Henry spoke quietly as they walked. "This dinner is important. Several members of the local gentry will be present. Their opinions influence more than one might think." Eliza nodded. He glanced at her. "You will serve in the dining room tonight." Her breath caught. "My lord, I am new. I fear I will—" "You will do well," he said, not unkindly. "And it will help settle the rumors." She understood what he meant. If she served alongside the senior staff, no one could claim she held a place of unusual favor. It was a gesture of protection, quiet, but unmistakable. They reached the dining room. Several maids arranged centerpieces while footmen polished the long table. The chandeliers reflected faint golden light across the glassware. Henry turned to her. "Stay near Mrs. Pembroke. Do only as she instructs. And Eliza," his voice softened, "do not fear making mistakes. You are allowed them." Something warm pricked behind her eyes. "Thank you, my lord." Mrs. Pembroke approached briskly. "Ah, Eliza, you'll shadow me tonight. It's a simple dinner, though a large one. Keep your hands steady and your eyes sharp." Eliza nodded, and the housekeeper gave a satisfied hum. Henry left them, but Eliza sensed his gaze linger for a heartbeat longer than it should have. The servants scattered to prepare. Eliza and Mrs. Pembroke moved through the room in smooth rhythms, arranging napkins, lighting candles, checking silver. Eliza focused intently, her hands steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. As she placed polished silver spoons along the edge of the table, the young footman from before approached. "You're brave," he whispered. "Most newcomers would have begged to serve anywhere but here." Eliza shook her head lightly. "I only want to work well." "That's enough," he said kindly, then moved off to continue his tasks. By evening, the guests began to arrive. The entrance hall filled with elegant coats and quiet greetings, with the shifting rustle of skirts and the low hum of polite conversation. The dining room glowed under the chandeliers, casting warm light over the carefully arranged table. Henry entered with the composed dignity expected of a man of his station. His presence commanded immediate attention. Several guests bowed or curtsied, offering respectful smiles. Eliza remained near the wall with the other servants, awaiting instruction. Her heart thumped with the anticipation of the night ahead. When all were seated, Mrs. Pembroke gave a subtle signal, and the first dishes were brought in. Eliza followed with a tray of delicately baked pastries, placing one before each guest as she had practiced. She moved quietly, her steps almost soundless. At first, everything went smoothly, but halfway through the course, Lord Ashcombe, a tall gentleman with pale hair and an affected air, set down his fork with unusual abruptness. He pressed a hand to his chest, drawing shallow breaths. "Are you well, sir?" someone asked. He shook his head slightly. "Just a moment. I believe something disagrees with me." Tension rippled across the table. Mrs. Pembroke stepped forward at once. "My Lord Ashcombe, shall I fetch water?" He waved her off weakly. "It's nothing. I only feel us and a bit light." Eliza's eyes caught something. The pastry on Lord Ashcombe's plate, slightly different from the others. A finer crust, a faint, glossy sheen. She turned quickly to the tray from which she'd served him. The cooks had prepared 2 variations of the pastry for the evening, one with a glaze for the noble guests and one plain for the staff. Lord Ashcombe's pastry had been placed in the wrong section. The glaze contained a particular type of nut oil known to trigger sensitivities in some guests. Amelia had once taught Eliza how to identify it by scent alone. She smelled it now. Eliza's pulse raced. She stepped forward. Henry looked sharply at her, astonished at her sudden movement. Eliza bowed slightly. "My lord," she said quietly, "forgive me. May I speak?" Henry's breath hitched, only once. But he nodded. Eliza turned to Lord Ashcombe. "Sir, do not eat another bite. Your pastry was mistakenly glazed. It contains an oil that disagrees with some people." Lord Ashcombe blinked. Oil? What? Eliza pointed gently to the faint sheen on the crust. This glaze. It was meant for another dish. Please take water only for now. Mrs. Pembroke rushed to bring a glass, her face pale. Henry stepped closer, his voice calm and steady. Lord Ashcombe, please follow her instructions. I assure you she knows what she is saying. The nobleman drank the water. After a moment his breathing eased. Colour returned slowly to his face. Bless me, he murmured. I believe you may have saved me from a most unpleasant episode. Eliza bowed her head. I am relieved, sir. The room buzzed with murmurs, admiration, surprise, disbelief. Henry's gaze remained fixed on Eliza with a new and unsettling intensity. Lord Ashcombe looked at Henry. Your maid has a sharp eye. Remarkable. Henry's reply was quiet. She does. The tension of the moment lifted gradually. Conversation resumed, though the guests kept glancing at Eliza with new curiosity. When the servants stepped back into their corner, Mrs. Pembroke leaned near Eliza and whispered, How did you know that? No one else could even see the difference. Eliza replied softly, I once learned from someone skilled in such matters. The housekeeper nodded slowly, almost reverently. Across the room, Henry watched her with a look she could not decipher. Shock, gratitude, wonder, all tangled together. When the final dish was cleared, Henry approached her. Eliza, he said softly, come with me. They stepped into the quiet corridor outside the dining room, where the noise of conversation softened to a distant hum. Henry halted, turning to face her fully. You spoke, he said. Yes, my lord. And you said what I forbade you to say. I did. He drew a breath that trembled faintly. Why? Because silence would have harmed someone. He stared at her, the truth sinking deep into him. And you knew. Before anyone, even the cook. Eliza lowered her eyes. Amelia taught me to notice these things. He stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Eliza, how much do you know that no one else sees? She looked up. More than you think, my lord, and more than you will want me to. Henry's expression changed, not with anger, but with something far more vulnerable. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he did, a voice from behind them called out, sharp and suspicious. My lord, why is the new maid speaking with you alone? Henry turned sharply at the voice, his expression shuddering with instinctive authority. Eliza stepped back out of reflex, lowering her head as if she had been caught doing something forbidden. Mrs. Pembroke stood at the end of the corridor, her posture stiff, her tone carefully neutral, but edged with worry. Behind her, two footmen carried trays, their eyes flickering with curiosity they tried to hide. My lord, the housekeeper repeated. Several guests witnessed the moment. They are asking questions. It would be wise to return to the dining room. Henry's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone calm. I will attend shortly, Mrs. Pembroke. The housekeeper's gaze moved to Eliza, lingering with quiet urgency. And the maid, my lord? Eliza held her breath. Henry answered without looking away from Mrs. Pembroke. She will accompany me. A wave of whispers rose behind the housekeeper. Mrs. Pembroke's brows pinched, not in disapproval but in warning. My lord, there are those who already misunderstand. Henry's voice remained controlled. Then allow them to misunderstand me, not her. Mrs. Pembroke hesitated for a long moment, then bowed. As you wish. When she walked away, the footmen followed her quickly, though both glanced back once more at Eliza. She felt her cheeks warm. The rumors that had begun quietly now had fuel far stronger than simple mistaken gossip. Henry waited until the corridor was empty before speaking in a low voice. Do not heed their words. You did nothing wrong. Eliza kept her gaze lowered. Even so, my presence may cause trouble. He stepped closer. Your presence prevented disaster tonight. I will not allow others to twist that. She swallowed, her voice small. But I fear they will. Henry hesitated, his breath catching in a brief moment of conflict. Then he said, Walk with me. He led her down the quiet corridor toward a side room used only during large gatherings. It was small and dimly lit, with a single window overlooking the courtyard. The noise from the dinner faded as Henry closed the door behind them. Eliza, he said, tone softening, what happened tonight cannot be ignored. She clasped her hands. I meant no harm, my lord. I know, he replied. That is precisely what troubles me. She glanced up, confused. He paced once, frustration weaving through his voice. You acted when others hesitated. You saw what no one else did. You recognized a danger without being told. And then, he paused, voice quiet. Then you risked breaking my command to stop it. Eliza's breath trembled. She remembered the moment vividly, the room holding its breath, Lord Ashcombe's growing distress. The glaze she recognized instantly. She had not considered the consequences of speaking. She had acted because she could not let harm unfold before her eyes. Henry approached her again, but more slowly this time. Tell me, how did you learn such instincts? Eliza's voice softened. Amelia taught me. She said the world whispers truths that most people never hear. He nodded slowly. And you listen. I try to. And tonight, Henry said, I finally realized what I should have seen sooner. Her heart skipped. What is that, my lord? That Amelia trusted you because your silence isn't weakness. It is strength. Quietness does not mean ignorance. His voice lowered. It means you see too much. Eliza lowered her gaze. I never wish to trouble you with what I see. You haven't troubled me. You have startled me. He paused. And that, I admit, I am not accustomed to. She dared to look up. Henry's expression held complexity, respect, curiosity, and something deeper he hadn't yet allowed himself to name. Eliza, he said quietly, tonight you defied my order. I did, she whispered, and you did so to protect my guest, my reputation, my household. Yes, my lord. He exhaled. Then understand this. From this moment, I revoke that order entirely. You may speak freely, whenever you see fit. Her eyes widened with relief she tried to hide. Thank you. Henry studied her a moment, then turned away, running a hand over the back of a chair. But the guests, they will talk, and talk becomes rumor. Rumor becomes story. Stories grow teeth. He looked back at her. I will not have you devoured by them. He was protecting her. Eliza lowered her voice. I do not fear what they say of me. Henry's expression tightened. But I do. She caught her breath. He continued, voice low. There is already unrest in the house. And tonight the gentry are watching closely. They observed you speaking to me. They observed me listening. Eliza took a careful step back. I apologize if I caused discomfort. Do not apologize, he interrupted sharply. Then his tone softened. Eliza, you acted with courage. It is I who must correct what others assume. A gentle silence followed. Finally, Henry said, You should return to the servants' quarters for the evening. The dinner will continue without your presence. She stiffened. Am I being removed from duties? No. His voice softened. I am asking you to rest. You have been under scrutiny since your first morning here. You deserve a moment to breathe. Eliza nodded slowly. Very well, my lord. He opened the door for her, but as she stepped through, Henry's voice followed quietly behind her. Eliza! She turned. Thank you for what you did tonight. Her smile was small but sincere. I only did what was right. He looked at her for a long moment, longer than polite, longer than expected, until footsteps approached from the main hall. Henry stepped back sharply. Go now. Eliza obeyed, disappearing down the corridor. But peace was not granted to her that evening. When she entered the servants' corridor, every whisper ceased at once. A dozen pairs of eyes turned toward her. The older maids looked worried. The younger ones looked frightened on her behalf. The footmen glanced at one another, unsure whether to bow or avoid her. Lucy, a kitchen maid, barely 16, rushed to her side. Eliza, she whispered urgently. What happened? Mrs. Pembroke said the dinner nearly fell apart, and Lord Ashcombe stood up so suddenly he knocked over his glass. And you spoke to him, and to the master. Eliza took a gentle breath. Everything is all right, Lucy. No, it isn't, Lucy pressed, wide-eyed. People are saying the Count, that he noticed you. Eliza's throat tightened. Noticed my work, that is all. Lucy bit her lip. Some people wish that were true. A group of senior staff passed them then, Mrs. Pembroke among them. The housekeeper paused, touched Eliza's arm briefly and said in a quiet voice, Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Eliza nodded and slipped into her small room. She sat on the edge of her cot, hands folded tightly. The room was simple and narrow, but the four walls comforted her more than usual. She tried to breathe away the tension that had gathered since morning, but she could not ignore what had changed. Henry had defended her, twice, and something had shifted in the way he spoke her name, as if he were trying to place a puzzle piece that suddenly belonged somewhere deeper than he expected. Eliza finally lay down, exhaustion pressing her eyes closed, but sleep refused to come. Around midnight, the house fell into full silence. Then, soft footsteps echoed outside her door. She sat upright. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, approaching with purpose. Her breath caught. They stopped directly in front of her room. The floorboard creaked beneath someone's weight. Eliza leaned forward, heart pounding, listening. A faint whisper slipped through the keyhole, her name, spoken in a voice she did not recognize. "Eliza?" She rose from the cot, unsure whether to open the door or call for someone, but before she could move, a shadow slid under the door, stretching across the floor toward her. Eliza pressed herself back against the wall, her breath too tight to steady. The shadow stretched across the wooden floor in a thin, wavering line. It was not shaped like a person. It moved as if carried by breath, not footsteps, quivering faintly even though no wind stirred in the corridor. Her name whispered again, soft as a sigh. "Eliza." She clutched the edge of her thin blanket, unsure whether she should answer or remain silent. She leaned closer to the door, trying to distinguish the voice. It was neither male nor female, neither familiar nor foreign. It hovered between tones, soft and distant, as though spoken through layers of time rather than wood. Her voice trembled when she finally whispered back, "Who is there?" The whisper beyond the door fell silent. Eliza reached out and touched the door with a cautious hand. Her fingers tingled immediately, as though the wood carried a faint hum of energy, not frightening, but unmistakably alive, with something left unfinished. She drew her hand away quickly. The corridor fell still. After several long breaths, she gathered the courage to press her ear to the door. Nothing. Not even the faint shift of a foot. Not even a breath. The shadow remained for a moment longer, then slowly withdrew, sliding back beneath the door until only pale moonlight remained in her room. Eliza waited, heart pounding. When the silence stretched on without interruption, she pressed her hands to her face and whispered to herself, "You're tired, too tired. It's only your mind playing tricks." But her mind had never played tricks like that before. She lay awake for another hour, listening to every creak of the old house. At last, near dawn, she drifted into a thin, restless sleep. Morning arrived with the clang of the kitchen bell. Eliza dressed quickly, though her limbs felt heavy. When she stepped into the corridor, she found the other servants rushing about with unusual haste. Lucy spotted her at once and hurried over. "Eliza, thank goodness. I thought you might still be asleep. Mrs. Pembroke said the master is calling for the senior staff, and for you." Eliza stiffened. "For me?" Lucy nodded vigorously. "Yes, she said to go straight to the breakfast hall." Eliza swallowed hard. A summons this early could not be for something ordinary. She followed Lucy down the stairs and into the bright hall, where several servants had gathered in a nervous line. Henry stood at the head of the table, speaking quietly with Mrs. Pembroke. He wore riding clothes instead of his usual structured coat, and there was a restlessness in the way he stood, as if he had been pacing moments before. When he saw Eliza enter, he stopped mid-sentence. "Miss Turner," he said, "come forward." Every servant turned to look at her. Eliza stepped toward him slowly, her eyes lowered. She felt the same heat of attention that had burned her on her first morning. But this time the weight felt different, curious, uneasy, expectant. Henry cleared his throat. "Last night's dinner required explanation. I have already spoken with the guests." His gaze glanced over the staff. "But I owe clarity to my own household as well." Whispers rippled quickly through the servants. Henry continued, "Miss Turner acted with presence of mind, not impropriety. She noticed an error that none of us did, and she prevented harm to a guest. That is all." Eliza kept her expression steady, though her heart trembled. Mrs. Pembroke added, "Miss Turner will remain under my instruction for future events. You are all to treat her with the same respect as any other member of this household." The servants nodded, though several exchanged surprised looks. Lucy beamed at Eliza. Henry dismissed the group with a simple nod. The staff scattered instantly, though many stole glances at Eliza as they passed. When the hall had nearly emptied, Henry turned to her. "Walk with me." Eliza followed him into a quiet side passage. Once the door closed behind them, Henry's expression shifted. No longer the composed authority of the master, but something quieter, more conflicted. "Eliza," he began, "Mrs. Pembroke told me you seemed shaken this morning. Did something happen during the night?" Eliza hesitated. He stepped closer, his voice soft. "You may tell me." "There was a sound," she whispered. "Footsteps. And someone whispered my name." Henry's face tightened. "In the servants' corridor?" "Yes, my lord." "Did you open the door?" "No." He frowned. "Did you see who it was?" "Only a shadow," she almost said. But shadows were not supposed to whisper. "No," she replied carefully, "but someone stood there, I'm sure of it." Henry breathed slowly, as if weighing multiple possibilities. "I will increase patrols at night. The castle is large. Sometimes guests wander, or a servant walks where they should not." Eliza nodded, though she doubted that any servant could have created the strange whisper she'd heard. Henry studied her a moment longer. "If it happens again, you must come straight to me." Her breath caught slightly. She nodded. He opened the door for her, and they stepped into the brighter corridor. Just as they parted, he paused, the unspoken tension between them tightening. "Eliza," he said quietly, "thank you for speaking honestly." She bowed her head. "Thank you for listening, my lord." Their eyes met for a moment too long, and Henry looked away abruptly, clearing his throat. "You should take breakfast before duties resume." She curtsied and left him. The day passed in a haze of chores, sweeping, polishing, arranging linens, assisting the laundry maids. Yet Eliza could not shake the memory of the whisper in the night. Several times she glanced over her shoulder, certain she heard soft footsteps behind her, but each time she found nothing. Near midday, Mrs. Pembroke called her to the upper corridor. "Miss Turner, the master requests your assistance in the West Wing." Eliza felt her stomach drop. "The West Wing?" Mrs. Pembroke sighed. "Yes. He wished to speak with you specifically. I imagine it concerns Amelia." Eliza thanked her and hurried toward the wing, her pulse echoing in her ears. Henry was waiting near the oak door, the same door she had passed on her first day, the same door behind which she had heard him whisper to someone no longer alive. He looked troubled. "Eliza," he said, "I need your eyes. Not your silence this time. What do you wish me to see?" He stepped aside so she could stand before the door. "Tell me what you sense in this place." Eliza inhaled slowly. The corridor was still. The portraits watched with painted solemnity. The air held neither warmth nor bitterness, only a faint current of something old and unfinished, like a breath waiting to be released. She closed her eyes and listened. "Memories linger," she murmured. "Not dangerous ones, but heavy. Someone carried grief here for a long time." Henry's jaw tightened. "I know." Eliza stepped closer to the door, laying her palm gently against it. "This room holds the last things she touched," Henry said quietly behind her. "I have not allowed anyone else inside for years, not even Mrs. Pembroke." Eliza turned to him slowly. "Why bring me here now?" His answer came after a long breath. "Because the past no longer stays where I left it." He reached into his coat and removed Amelia's letter. "And because she trusted you." Eliza's eyes softened. "My lord, there may be things in this room you do not wish me to see." Henry shook his head. "There is nothing in these walls that can wound me more than her absence already has." He placed his hand on the door handle. "Are you ready?" he asked. Eliza nodded. Henry pushed the door open. The hinges creaked softly, releasing a breath of air that smelled faintly of dust and something older, not decay, but time preserved. The room was small and simply furnished. A writing desk, a chair by the window, a narrow bookshelf and a few personal belongings carefully arranged, as if waiting for their owner to return. Eliza stepped inside slowly. Henry remained at the doorway, as though unsure whether he belonged or intruded. Something near the desk caught Eliza's eye, a small wooden box with delicate carving along the lid. She approached it, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface. "My lord," she whispered. "May I?" Henry swallowed. "Yes." She lifted the lid carefully. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. Henry inhaled sharply. "I believed those were lost." Eliza touched the ribbon, preparing to lift the stack, but froze. Someone else's handwriting was visible through the top envelope. not Amelia's. A bold, formal script. Henry stepped beside her. "Whose hand is that?" Eliza swallowed. "I do not know. But the letter is addressed to you." Henry reached for it, but before he could take hold, a soft knock sounded on the open door behind them. "Eliza?" a hesitant voice called. Henry turned sharply. Mrs. Pembroke stood at the threshold, her eyes wide with worry. "My lord, forgive me, but you must come at once." Henry stiffened. "What has happened?" Mrs. Pembroke swallowed hard. "It is Lord Ashcombe. He has collapsed again." Henry did not hesitate. He turned from the wooden box and strode toward Mrs. Pembroke, his voice firm but steady. "Where is he?" "In the blue guest chamber, my lord," she replied quickly. "He began to feel faint after breakfast. The moment he stood, his legs gave out beneath him." Henry's jaw tightened. "Is the physician on his way?" "Yes, my lord. Someone has been sent to fetch him." Henry gave a short nod. "Eliza, come." She followed him and Mrs. Pembroke down the corridor, her mind racing. Lord Ashcombe had seemed improved last night. He had even joked lightly with one of the other guests before retiring. But if he had collapsed again, something was wrong. Servants hurried past them in anxious silence. Footmen stood at corners awaiting instruction. Maids carried basins of cool water. The entire house felt strained, suspended, as though waiting for the master's voice to steady it. When they reached the blue guest chamber, Henry paused a moment before entering. Inside, Lord Ashcombe lay on the bed, pale and breathing shallowly. A thin sheen of perspiration covered his forehead. His valet knelt beside him, dabbing his brow with a cloth. "Your lordship," Henry said, stepping closer. "Can you hear me?" Ashcombe's eyes fluttered open. "Blackwell, forgive the trouble. Must be the dinner. The excitement. Nothing more." Eliza watched the man's trembling hands. This was not simple fatigue. She glanced at the tray nearby. A glass of water sat untouched. A bowl of broth half finished. A plate of fruit with a bite taken from one slice. She stepped closer, examining the fruit with sharp attention. Henry noticed. "Eliza," she pointed to the slice of pear. The cut edges had browned faster than expected. The skin had a faint residue on it that she recognized at once. A sugar glaze sometimes dusted with powdered almond to preserve shine. A glaze Amelia had taught her to identify instantly. "My lord," Eliza whispered, "the pear, it wasn't rinsed." If Lord Ashcombe reacted to the nut oil last night, Henry's expression hardened. Then even the smallest trace could trigger another episode. The valet looked panicked. I did not know. The fruit was delivered already prepared." Henry turned to Mrs. Pembroke. "Find out who arranged this tray." "Yes, my lord," she said, rushing out with two maids. Lord Ashcombe tried to sit up, but Eliza placed a gentle hand near his arm, not touching, but offering quiet steadiness. "Please stay lying down, sir. The physician will come soon." Ashcombe gave her a strained smile. "You again, Miss Turner. You seem always to know what ails me." She tried to smile in return. "Only what Amelia taught me." Henry glanced sharply at her when she said the name, then turned back to Ashcombe. "You will remain here until the doctor arrives." Ashcombe nodded weakly and closed his eyes. Henry motioned Eliza aside. "Come outside." They stepped into the hallway. Henry lowered his voice so none of the servants could overhear. "Eliza, this is not coincidence. 2 days in a row the same man falls ill from the same cause. This is deliberate." Eliza shook her head. "It could be a mistake, my lord. Misplaced trays. Confusion in the kitchen." Henry's voice grew tight. "Or someone in this house wishes to cause misunderstanding. Or worse." Eliza felt a chill sweep through her. "But who would—" Before she could finish, Henry cut in softly. "Last night when you saved him, there were eyes watching us. Today Ashcombe falls again. Someone is trying to turn attention toward you, or toward me." She stepped back slightly. "Toward me?" "Your presence unsettles this house," Henry said, but his tone held no blame. "Not because you've done anything wrong, but because Amelia trusted you, and someone does not want the past resurfacing." Eliza's breath caught. "Do you think it's connected to her disappearance?" Henry looked down the hallway as if expecting someone to emerge from the shadows. "I think everything is connected to that." A tense silence settled between them. At last Henry said, "Come with me." They left the guest wing and walked toward the narrower northern hall. Henry moved quickly, though Eliza sensed from his expression that he wasn't entirely certain what he sought. When they reached the door of a small sitting room, he shut it behind them and leaned against the table. "Eliza," he began, "there are things you must know." She waited quietly. "My father dismissed Amelia," he said slowly. "He never told me why. He claimed she was involved in some impropriety, something about her conduct. I did not believe him. Amelia was loyal, devoted, and far wiser than most women I have ever known. But she left the very next day." Eliza listened closely. "She told us she had to leave because someone here threatened her reputation." Henry nodded grimly. "My father, I suspect. He had moments of suspicion, moments that bordered on paranoia near the end of his life." Eliza felt the tremor beneath the truth. She recalled her own father's struggles. "My lord," she said gently, "Amelia never blamed you." Henry's voice dropped. "But I blamed myself." He looked up at her, then truly looked, and the exchange held more honesty than any he had allowed until now. Something shifted in the air. But before either could say another word, the door burst open. Mrs. Pembroke entered with urgency. "My lord," she said breathlessly, "you must come." Henry straightened. "What now?" "The kitchen staff is in disarray," she said. "Everyone claims innocence over the fruit tray, but someone just found this." She held out a small folded paper. Henry took it and read it silently. His expression darkened. "What does it say?" Eliza asked softly. Henry handed her the note. "We all know the girl is hiding something. Remove her from the house or we will." Eliza felt the floor tilt beneath her. Henry took the paper back with a controlled, simmering anger. "Cowards," Mrs. Pembroke whispered. "My lord, the staff is frightened. They think Lord Ashcombe's illness has something to do with her." "That is nonsense," Henry snapped. "Eliza prevented harm, not caused it." But the housekeeper's gaze remained troubled. "Fear does not need truth to grow." Henry looked at Eliza. She stood very still, as though trying to keep her breath from shaking. "My lord," she said quietly, "if my presence brings unrest—" "Do not finish that," Henry cut in sharply. "You are not the cause of this. Someone else is." Mrs. Pembroke looked between them, uncertain whether to remain. Henry dismissed her with a brief nod, and she left reluctantly. When the door shut, Henry stepped closer to Eliza. "I will not allow anyone to threaten you." She raised her eyes slowly. "But you cannot protect me from everyone." "Yes," he said softly, "I can." Silence settled, charged and delicate. "This house," he murmured, "has gone blind from too many secrets. Amelia tried to keep them from spreading. Now you walk in her shadow, and some people fear you will uncover what they wish to keep hidden." Eliza took a slow breath. "I do not seek to expose anything, my lord." He stepped even closer. "But you see what others overlook. You cannot help but reveal truth simply by existing." She lowered her gaze. "Then what should we do?" Henry hesitated. His next words were quiet, but they carried weight. "We search, together, until we understand what Amelia left behind, and who wishes it to remain buried." Eliza's breath caught. "Together?" "Yes," he said. "I trust no one else as I trust you." Her heart felt suddenly too full. But before she could speak, a sharp cry echoed from the hallway, the sound of someone calling Henry's name with urgent fear. "My lord, you must come at once." They froze. Henry rushed to the door, throwing it open. A footman stood there, panting. "My lord, it's the West Wing. Someone was seen entering Amelia's old room. No one knows who." Henry turned to Eliza, his eyes blazing with determination and dread. "Come," he whispered. And together they ran toward the west corridor. The footsteps of Henry and Eliza echoed down the stone floor as they hurried toward the West Wing. Servants pressed back against the walls to make room, their anxious eyes following the pair with equal parts fear and curiosity. Henry did not slow, and Eliza kept close beside him, her breath tight, her pulse quick. When they reached the far end of the dim corridor, Mrs. Pembroke stood waiting, her hands clasped firmly before her. She bowed slightly to Henry. "My lord, the house is in a state, but we have searched every corner of this wing. No one is here." Henry's gaze swept the corridor. "Who reported the intruder?" "One of the younger footmen, my lord, but he is shaken." I believe his imagination ran ahead of him. Eliza glanced to the oak door, Amelia's room. Slightly ajar, a faint draught stirred its edge. Her heartbeat quickened. The room had been closed for years. No servant had the authority to enter without Henry's express permission. The open door felt like a small wound, exposing something long covered. Henry approached it slowly, shoulders taut. "No one enters this room unbidden," he said. "Not anymore." Mrs. Pembroke nodded. "I understand, my lord. The staff has been informed." Henry pushed the door shut with a soft but resolute motion. Then he turned to the housekeeper. "Gather the entire staff in the great hall within the hour. I will speak with them." Mrs. Pembroke hesitated. "My lord, with respect, strong words may worsen the fear. Everyone is unsettled after the note." Henry's voice softened only slightly. "Fear thrives in silence. It ends with truth." She bowed. "Very well." When she departed, Henry faced Eliza, his expression shadowed with something more complex than anger. "I will not allow chaos to rule this house. Not again." Eliza lowered her gaze. "You blame yourself for what happened to Amelia. Everyone sees that, my lord." He stiffened, though he did not deny it. "And now the past threatens to repeat itself." Eliza shook her head gently. "No, this time you are not alone." His breath caught faintly, but instead of answering, he extended his hand toward her. "Walk with me." She placed her fingers lightly on his arm, and they moved down the corridor side by side. As they walked, the tension in Henry's shoulders slowly eased. The castle no longer felt like a labyrinth of suspicion, but like a place trying to breathe again. In the great hall, the servants had already begun to gather, forming a loose semicircle. Their eyes darted nervously between Eliza and the door to the west wing. The footman who had raised the alarm stood near the back, twisting his cap in his hands. Henry stepped forward, and silence swept over the hall like a tide pulling back to reveal the sea floor. "Everyone," he began, voice steady. "I have heard the rumors circulating through this house. I have read the note left for me. And I have learned that fear, not reason, is guiding too many of you." Some servants shifted uncomfortably. Others stood rigid, eyes wide. Henry continued, "Lord Ashcombe's illness was not caused by any member of this household. It was an unfortunate mistake, nothing more. Miss Turner prevented far greater harm last night. Without her intervention, the matter could have been far worse." Eliza felt several eyes turn toward her, this time with something like dawning respect. Henry added, "No servant shall be threatened under my roof. No accusations will be tolerated without proof, and no one will raise a hand or a false word against Miss Turner." Murmurs rippled through the hall. The young footman who had spread the alarm looked ashamed. Henry lifted a hand, and quiet returned. "We will not feed shadows with fear," he said. "The past belongs in the past. Miss Turner is part of the future of this household, and she will be treated as such. Do you all understand?" The servants nodded quickly, offering murmured assurances. Some bowed. Others kept their heads lowered, chastened. Eliza watched them, relief loosening the knot inside her chest. When Henry dismissed them, the hall emptied with surprising order. Mrs. Pembroke lingered, giving Eliza a small approving nod before returning to her duties. Even those who had previously whispered seemed subdued, thoughtful. When only Henry and Eliza remained, he let out a quiet breath. That needed to be said. Eliza nodded. "They will understand now. I hope so," he murmured. Then he turned to her, his expression softening. "Eliza, for weeks, this house has stood on the edge of things unspoken. But today, I want no more shadows." She looked up cautiously. "What do you wish to say?" Henry stepped closer, but not with urgency, as with a kind of quiet sincerity. "I owe you more than gratitude. You have stood calm under humiliation, under suspicion, under fear. And still, you choose to help. My lord, You have given me back a piece of Amelia," Henry said softly. "Her wisdom, her patience, her way of seeing truth without judgment." Eliza's throat tightened. "She cared for you deeply." He nodded. "And she trusted you. I must honor that trust, not just for her sake, but for mine." They walked toward the courtyard doors, where pale morning light filtered through the glass. Henry opened one gently, allowing the fresh air to drift in. "For too long," he said, "I allowed grief to rule my decisions. I let my father's suspicions linger where they had no place. Amelia's departure cast a shadow I never challenged. Eliza stepped beside him. But you searched for the truth in your own way. You never stopped caring. He looked at her then, truly looked, and his eyes softened. Now the truth is all that matters. They walked slowly through the courtyard garden, where trimmed hedges and winter flowers framed the quiet paths. Servants passed now and then, offering respectful bows to their master, and a new, gentler glance to Eliza. Henry spoke after a long silence. "Tell me what Amelia taught you most." Eliza thought carefully. "She taught me that sorrow is a language, my lord, and people speak it even when they try to hide it." Henry gave a small, wistful smile. "Then you have been reading my thoughts since the moment we met?" She gave a soft laugh. "Not your thoughts, my lord. Only your eyes. That may be the same thing," he said quietly. They continued walking until they reached the stone archway where Amelia had once read to Henry as a child. The memory hung in the air, gentle and alive. Henry paused. "Eliza, I cannot promise that the path ahead will be simple. My family's past touches us both now, but I also know this. I trust you as I trust no one else." Her voice trembled, "and I will never betray that trust." He reached for her hand but stopped himself just short of touching it. Instead, he allowed the moment to rest between them like a quiet vow. "Eliza," he said softly, "whatever secrets remain in this house, we will face them together. No more fear, no more silence." She nodded, her eyes bright with something she did not dare name. Then Henry added almost in a whisper, "Ravenshire can be a home again, for both of us." Emotion rose in her, warm and certain, a sense of belonging she had never felt before. She had arrived as a timid maid, burdened by her past, shaken by humiliation. Now she stood beside a man who no longer looked like a distant master, but like someone stepping out of his own loneliness. The courtyard wind lifted a strand of her hair, and Henry watched her for a moment that pressed gently on the edges of propriety, but instead of pulling back, he breathed deeply, letting the peace between them settle. Eliza lowered her gaze and whispered, "The house feels different today." Henry nodded. "Because the truth draws breath again." They walked back toward the castle door, unhurried, steady. No shadows followed them. No whispers lingered. A new clarity had filled the walls, and for the first time since Amelia's departure, Ravenshire felt less like a place of sorrow and more like a place where healing had begun. As they stepped back inside, Henry paused beside her. "Eliza," he said gently, "there is still the letter in Amelia's room, and the box. We will open both together when you are ready." She nodded. "I am ready now." He allowed himself a small smile. "Then we will face it." But instead of turning toward the west wing immediately, Henry placed a hand lightly over his chest, almost unconsciously, as if steadying a feeling that had grown too quickly, too quietly, for him to name. Eliza saw the gesture and understood it more clearly than he did. They walked on, not master and servant, not suspicion and secrecy, but two souls moving toward the same truth, no longer afraid of what waited ahead. The castle exhaled around them, calm and open. Nothing chased them now. Nothing pressed from behind. Only the soft promise of what waited beyond the final unanswered questions. Henry led Eliza toward the west wing with steady steps, his expression calm but resolute. The long corridor stretched before them, no longer dark with fear or secrets, but filled with a quiet expectancy. Each footstep echoed with something unspoken, something neither had dared to name until now. Eliza walked at his side, her heart beating with a rhythmic certainty she had never known. The house did not whisper tonight. It waited. When they reached Amelia's room, Henry paused at the door. The key rested in his hand, gleaming faintly in the lantern light. "Eliza," he said quietly, "whatever we find inside, I want you to know that nothing you discover will change what you mean to this house, or to me." She felt warmth rise inside her, gentle and deep. "I trust you, my lord." He gave a faint, almost shy breath. "Then let us see what Amelia wished us to find." He unlocked the door. The room welcomed them with stillness. Dust motes drifted like tiny stars. The scent of old paper and gentle lavender lingered faintly, as if Amelia had stepped out only moments ago. Henry moved toward the wooden box they had discovered that morning. Its carved lid was intricate, shaped with small ivy leaves curling around the edges. Eliza stood beside him. "May I open it?" "Yes," he said softly. "You must be the one." Her fingers lifted the lid gently. Inside lay the bundle of letters tied with ribbon. The top one bore Henry's full name in bold script, unfamiliar and strong. He reached for it with careful hands. The wax seal cracked softly as he opened the envelope. Eliza watched his face as he read. His expression shifted from tension to surprise, to something like relief breaking over him slowly. He exhaled deeply. "Eliza, this is not a letter from Amelia." "Then from whom?" He looked up at her. "From my father." Eliza's eyes widened. "Your father? He left it for you?" Henry nodded slowly. "Listen." He read aloud. "My son, if you find this, it means the truth has surfaced at last. I feared my own weakness too much to speak it in life. Forgive me for the silence I forced upon Amelia. Forgive me for the burden I left you. She was never at fault. The scandal was mine alone. I acted out of pride, not protection. I wronged her, and I wronged you. Let this letter free you from the shadows I created. Your father." Henry lowered the paper, his breath trembling. "He lied," he whispered. "All those years, he knew she was innocent." Eliza touched his arm gently. He tried, at the end, to repair what was broken. Henry shook his head, the ache in his eyes raw. His pride destroyed her place here. "And then I carried that weight as if it were mine." "You have carried more than any man should," Eliza said softly. He turned toward her, his voice lower. "I have carried loneliness, silence, regret. And then you arrived, and everything began to change." Eliza felt tears press behind her eyes. "I only wish to understand the truth, and to help." "You did more than help," Henry said. "You brought light where I had allowed only darkness." She lowered her gaze, her voice trembling. "I never imagined I would find anything here except work. I never imagined I would matter." Henry stepped closer. "You matter more than you know." A soft silence filled the room, not heavy, not strained, warm, restful, like a truth finally freed. Henry's eyes drifted to the remaining letters in the box. "There is more." Eliza untied the ribbon, revealing several smaller notes, some written in Amelia's elegant hand. She lifted the first one. "Read this only when you are ready, Henry. I have trusted Eliza because her heart is clear. She will see what you cannot yet bear. Do not push her away." Henry gave a faint, aching smile. "Amelia could see the future better than I could see my own present." "Because she loved you," Eliza whispered. He grew quiet. "I think she wanted me to find someone who could lift what I could not." Eliza lowered the note. "And do you feel lighter now?" His gaze found hers with an intensity that held no hesitation. "Yes." Another silence settled, fuller now, charged with emotion neither dared to name out loud. Finally, Henry said, "There is one more letter addressed to you." "To me?" He handed her a small envelope. Her name was written in Amelia's graceful script. Eliza felt her knees weaken at the sight. She opened it slowly. "My dear Eliza, if you are reading this, then you have walked into the heart of Ravenshire. I knew you would. You have a gift, one born of tenderness and sorrow, and you will use it to guide others who cannot speak their pain. But there is something else I know. One day someone will see your quiet strength, someone worthy, someone who needs you as you need him." Eliza stopped reading, the words blurring with emotion. Henry watched her carefully. "What does it say?" Eliza shook her head slightly, unable to speak yet. Henry reached for the letter gently and read the final lines himself. "Take care of Henry, if he allows it. His heart is more fragile than he believes, and perhaps one day your courage will give him the strength to love again." The room fell silent. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. Henry held the letter against his chest, eyes closing briefly as if absorbing every word. When he opened them again, something in him had changed. The walls that had always stood around him, the walls of discipline, loneliness, and fear, had cracked. "Eliza," he said in a low, steady voice, "you have done more than reveal truth. You have healed what I thought was beyond repair." Eliza's voice shook. "I have only tried to honor Amelia, and to honor you." He stepped closer, closing the space between them. His voice deepened, softer than she had ever heard it. "Do you know what I feared most when you first arrived?" She shook her head. that I would see too much of myself reflected in your eyes, that you would see the parts of me I never wanted anyone to witness. Eliza felt her breath catch. And did I? He nodded slowly. Yes, and it did not break me. It freed me. He reached for her hand, then, carefully, reverently, as if afraid she might vanish. You are braver than anyone I have known. Eliza felt warmth spread through her, gentle and overwhelming. I was only myself, my lord. Do not call me that, he whispered. Not now. Her chest tightened. Then what shall I call you? He took a slow step closer. Henry. Her breath shivered out. Henry. The sound of his name in her voice made something fragile and long hidden melt in his expression. Eliza, he murmured, lifting her hand to his chest. I do not wish to lose you. Not to fear, not to gossip, not to distance, not to anything. Tears filled her eyes. You will never lose me. Not if you wish me to stay. His voice thickened with emotion. More than stay. I want you here beside me, as my equal, as the one who sees through every shadow. She felt her heart flood with warmth, with disbelief, with happiness she had never imagined. Henry leaned his forehead against hers gently. Do you feel the same? A soft sob escaped her, not of pain but of release. Yes, yes, Henry, I do. His hands cupped hers, steady and warm. Then allow me to ask you something I have never asked anyone. She lifted her face, breath trembling. Eliza, he whispered, will you marry me? Her answer rose without hesitation, carried by every moment they had endured together. Yes, she breathed, 1,000 times. Yes. He exhaled with relief that seemed to unburden years of quiet sorrow. His hands moved to her waist gently, drawing her into an embrace that held all the tenderness he had kept locked away. She leaned into him, feeling the beat of his heart steady and sure beneath her hands. He pressed a soft kiss to her forehead, then her temple, then paused, waiting, asking permission with the simple closeness of his breath. Eliza lifted her face toward him in answer. Their lips met with a quiet, aching sweetness, a promise, a release, a beginning. His hands rose to cradle her face with reverence, her fingers curled at his collar as if anchoring herself to certainty. It was not a kiss of urgency, but of belonging. Two souls, long burdened by silence, finally finding their voice. When he drew back, his forehead rested against hers. You are my future, Henry whispered. You have always been the truth I needed. Eliza smiled through tears. And you are the safe place I never thought I would find. They stood there a long while, holding each other in the gentle golden quiet of Amelia's room, surrounded not by ghosts, but by blessings. At last Henry spoke again. The staff will be surprised. Eliza laughed softly. More than surprised, he smiled. Then let them talk. This time they will speak truth. He offered his arm. She took it. Together they walked back down the corridor, step by step, toward the life waiting ahead, towards marriage, towards a home rebuilt on trust, not fear, toward a love that neither of them had sought, yet both had needed. And as they reached the archway where Henry had once stood alone in memory, he turned to her with quiet reverence. Eliza Blackwell, he whispered, savoring the name that would soon be hers. You have given me back my heart. She touched his cheek softly. And you have given me a place where I finally belong. They stepped forward together. And the castle, for the first time in decades, felt truly alive. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you like the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories, full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.